On a barren desert world, under two burning suns, the ground stretched endless and dry, a sea of sand and stone, with no shade for miles, and no mercy in the heat. In the middle of this harsh place, a group of human settlers worked with steady hands and strong, while building something strange and simple, made of stone blocks, sand pressed tight, and scraps of metal gathered from old wrecks. They did not complain, they did not rest. They moved with care, placing each piece as if they were painting a picture of survival in the endless dust. Watching from a distance stood a cluster of alien explorers, tall, thin, and wrapped in shining armor plates that gleamed under the twin suns. Their eyes glowed bright, like crystals, and their voices carried the sound of arrogance. As they laughed at what they saw, the shelter, rising slowly from the earth, was small, rough, and low, its walls uneven, its roof slanted with thick beams pressed against stone. The aliens whispered among themselves, words sharp with scorn and laughter. Primitive, they said. Fragile, they said. Weak, like the humans who built it. To their eyes, it was a pile of dirt compared to the grand domes of their people, domes that shone with light, domes that could stand against storms of fire and seas of ice, domes that sang with energy, fields crafted for knowledge older than human history itself. The aliens laughed harder, for they thought the humans foolish for even trying. The humans did not speak back. They kept working, their hands rough with sand, their skin dark from the suns, their eyes narrow against the glare, for they had no time for arguments. Their shelter was not built for beauty nor for glory. It was built for one purpose: to hold strong. When the desert decided to rise against them, the narrator's voice slipped across the scene, painting the truth in simple tones. Humans were not born from comfort. They were born from struggle, and their ways were not the ways of luxury, but the ways of survival in worlds that try to break them. Still, the aliens saw only weakness, and they continued to mock. One pointed at the roof and said, "The next storm will lift that cover like paper." Another tapped his claws against his armor and said, "A single blast of sand will tear those walls apart." A third threw back his head and laughed so loud that even the humans heard him, calling the shelter a cave, a children fit only for play. The group roared with delight, and pride filled their voices, for they believed their words to be true. The human leader, an older man with scars across his arms and dust across his face, paused only for a moment as he lifted a heavy beam in a place. His eyes rose toward the horizon, then dropped again to his work. He said, "Nothing for the shelter had to be finished before the desert changed its face." The other humans followed his silence and worked faster, their movement steady, like waves against the shore. Their sweat fell like rain into the sand, but their focus did not break. The aliens continued to jeer, yet something in the air began to shift. The desert floor trembled faint, and the wind whispered across the dunes with a voice deeper than before. A strange shadow spread far away, almost unseen at first, like a dark smear against the golden horizon. One of the aliens paused, his laughter caught short his throat, but the others did not notice, for they were too lost in their pride. The shadow grew wider, darker, heavier, until the light of the suns dimmed, as if a curtain had been drawn across the sky. The humans noticed it at once. Their leader raised his head, his eyes locked on the horizon, where the darkness gathered and the wind began to grow, teeth sharp with sand and dust. The workers felt it too, and their hands moved quicker, stacking stone, pressing sand, ceiling cracked with care, for they knew what was coming, and there was no time to waste. The aliens finally turned and looked, their glowing eyes narrowing as the sky twisted. The clouds that gathered were not gentle clouds. They were monstrous rolling towers of dust and fire that reached toward the stars. They moved with the speed of beasts, hungry and wild, and their roar grew louder with each breath, like thunder tearing the heavens apart. The ground shook beneath the weight of their coming, and the very air grew heavy, as if it could crush lungs. The alien laughter faded into silence. One by one their smiles broke, and their voices stilled for now. They remembered stories whispered in maps and warnings etched in records. This desert was alive. It did not forgive. It did not forget. Storms here were not storms of other worlds. They were mountains of sand that swallowed cities, rivers of dust that buried armies, oceans of wind that broke the proudest walls. The aliens had believed themselves untouchable. They had believed their domes could last forever, but the sight before them was not one to laugh at. The humans kept building even as the storm grew closer. Their bodies bent low, their faces set with grim knowledge. Each stone placed was another chance, each beam lowered was another breath of safety. The aliens stepped back uncertain, their armor gleaming less bright under the darkening skies. The commander of the alien group tried to scoff, but his voice shook as he said, "This shelter is nothing. This storm is nothing. We are stronger than them." Yet even he felt the lie in his words. The roar of the storm rolled closer, like a beast charging from the edge of the world. The humans stopped only when the last piece of their shelter was in place. Their leader ran his hand along the rough walls, his scars glowing in the dim light. And he whispered to his people with calm strength, "It will hold." They nodded and followed him inside as the first heavy gust struck the land. The aliens remained outside, watching the darkness sweep across the horizon faster and faster, their pride fading into unease, into doubt, into fear. Their eyes flicked to the small human shelter buried half into the ground, its walls slanted to break the wind, its roof layered with stone and scrap, its entrance narrow and low. They remembered their laughter, they remembered their jokes, yet the sound of the storm drowned every memory and left only the truth. The sky split with lightning of dust and sand, and the sound of it was like the sky itself breaking. The dunes rose high into waves, the suns vanished behind the wall of fury, and the land became shadow and fire and thunder. The storm was coming, and nothing could stop it. And in that moment, as the aliens stared in silence and the humans waited within their humble walls, the first claw of the storm reached the horizon and tore it apart, leaving no doubt of the power that was about to fall upon them all. The desert roared alive as the storm struck with fury. The sky vanished behind a wall of swirling sand and lightning. The ground shook like the bones of the world were breaking. The air filled with dust so thick that even breath felt like knives against the throat. The aliens who had once stood laughing now stumbled back, their armor shields glowing faintly as the storm clawed at their edges. Yet even their advanced technology struggled against the wild power of this land. Inside the human shelter, there was no laughter, only silence broken by the sound of wind outside. Like a monster tearing the sky apart, the walls trembled, yet held strong. Stone pressed tight against stone, beams locked against pressure, sand packed deep into cracks. The humans crouched together inside the small space, their eyes reflecting dim light from a single lantern. Their leader sat near the entrance, listening to every sound, every shift of the wind, as if the storm spoke in a language only he could hear. The aliens outside staggered forward, trying to activate their domes of energy, but the storm ripped into them with claws of sand and whips of fire. The shimmering barriers flickered weak against the endless force. The aliens cried out as their proud shields cracked and sparks scattered into the raging air. One by one, they fell to the sand, crawling low, covering their heads from the screaming sky. Fear spread through them, as quick as lightning, for they had never known such power that could not be stopped by technology or pride. The storm howled louder and heavier. It grew thicker, darker, wilder. Every moment lightning burst across the sky, not white, not blue, but red like the blood of the desert itself. Thunder shook the earth in waves, and the dunes rose high like towers, only to crash down again, burying everything in their path. The aliens tried to run, but the storm chased them like hunters chasing prey, every movement harder, every breath sharper, until all they could do was cling to the ground and hope. Inside the shelter, the humans felt the shake of the land, yet their walls did not break, their roof did not lift. The sound outside was death itself, yet within their space there was calm, though narrow, and dark, though small, and rough. The shelter held like a stubborn heart, refusing to stop beating. The younger humans clutched one another, their eyes wide, their breath short. But their leader raised a hand, steady and calm, and his voice came low and strong. "This is nothing compared to storms I have seen," he said, and those words carried strength to all who heard them. Hours passed, yet the storm did not weaken. It screamed and tore across the land without mercy, scattering dunes, breaking rock, turning the desert into a sea of chaos. The aliens outside were nearly buried. Some had lost their armor plates to the grinding sand. Others lay gasping for air, their glowing eyes dim with exhaustion. They looked toward the human shelter, their pride gone, their laughter dead, now replaced with desperate whispers. Perhaps the humans had known something they had not. Perhaps their strange low shelter was more than it seemed. The human leader listened as the storm pressed harder against their walls, sand pressing in waves against stone. The roof creaked, beams straining, yet still holding. The humans pressed back, loose dust filled their lungs. But they did not falter. One by one, they passed water skins to each other, sharing small sips and keeping strength alive. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the rough walls, and in those shadows there was shone brighter than any flame outside. The aliens finally dragged themselves closer to the shelter, half buried by sand, crawling with broken pride. They reached the entrance and called out, their voices muffled by the roaring wind asking to be let inside. The humans heard them, and silence filled the shelter heavy like stone. Some wanted to refuse, for the aliens had mocked them and laughed at their work. Some wanted revenge, some wanted pride. But the leader raised his hand once more and shook his head. His voice came soft but firm. Open the way, he said, for the desert is enemy to all, not just to us. The humans pulled aside the entrance stone by stone and let the aliens crawl in one by one, their glowing eyes wide with shame. As they entered the small space, they looked around at the rough walls, the sand packed deep, the beams heavy and strong, and they realized this simple place, built by human hands, had done what their mighty domes could not. It had stood against the storm without breaking. As the aliens crouched low, their bodies trembling from the fury outside, one whispered in disbelief, "How does it hold?" Another asked, "Why does it not fall?" The leader of the humans looked at them, his scarred face calm, as he said, "We build not for pride, but for survival. Stone by stone, we learned how to make the earth itself our ally. Sand is not enemy. When you know how to shape it, metal is not weak. When you learn how to bend it." He paused, his eyes sharp in the dim light. "While you look for beauty, we built for strength, and that is why we still breathe." The aliens had no answer. Their glowing eyes lowered, their pride stripped by truth. They had believed themselves above this world. They had believed their technology untouchable, yet the storm had proven otherwise. The humans sat steady in their shelter, and the aliens sat broken in their shame. The storm raged on for hours more, each gust louder, each flash brighter, each rumble deeper. The walls shook, the beams groaned, the roof bent. Yet still the shelter held against all odds. Every human pressed their weight against stone. Every hand worked to patch small cracks. Every heart burned with survival. And so they endured. At last, after what felt like endless nights, the roar began to fade. The wind lost its sharp teeth. The dunes settled, and the sky began to clear. The twin suns returned, breaking through the last clouds. The desert once more stretched endless and quiet, as if nothing had happened. But the land bore scars, deep dunes, shifted mountains of sand buried what had stood before. The humans stepped out first, their eyes narrowed against the light. They looked across the silent wasteland and saw broken pieces of alien domes, scattered half-buried under mountains of dust, shining scraps lost in the endless desert. The aliens followed their armor, cracked their pride, gone. They stood in silence, staring at the wreckage of what they once believed indestructible, and then they turned their eyes to the small human shelter still standing firm against the horizon, unbroken. The human leader walked forward, his steps slow, his voice steady. "The desert teaches us always respect it, for it does not care for your pride or your strength. It only cares if you know how to endure." The aliens lowered their heads. For the first time they understood. And as the suns rose higher, burning bright over the scarred land, the humans stood tall against the horizon, survivors of the storm, while the aliens who had laughed at them now stood silent before a truth they could not deny. The desert world still breathed heavy from the storm. Dunes stretched far like sleeping beasts. Winds whispered across the sand, carrying the last echoes of the night. When death itself had tried to tear the land apart, the aliens stood silent, their armor broken, their pride scattered like dust. They stared at the human shelter, still standing low, strong, unbroken, while their advanced domes lay crushed under mountains of sand. The humans emerged slow from the shelter, their faces marked with grit and sweat, yet their eyes were calm. They carried no pride, no boast, only the steady silence of survivors. Their leader walked at the front, scars across his hands, catching the light of the twin suns. His gaze scanned the land, searching the horizon, where dunes shifted like waves and shadows moved across the sand. The aliens whispered among themselves, their voices uneasy. Some spoke of luck, others spoke of strange chance, yet none could deny what they had seen. The shelter had saved the humans while their great domes had failed. The truth pressed heavy like the desert heat, and though they had once laughed, now their words were hushed, their eyes lowered. The leader of the humans crouched to the ground. He picked up a handful of sand, letting it fall slow between his fingers. The grains scattered in the wind like time itself, endless and unyielding. He looked at the aliens, and his voice came low and steady. "You thought us weak, because we build with our hands, because we use what the land gives, yet survival is not in beauty or in power. Survival is in knowing how to bend and not break. The desert shows no mercy, it only teaches." One alien stepped forward, his armor cracked, his eyes dim with shame. He spoke with a tremor. "Why would you open your shelter to us after we mocked you, after we called you weak?" The leader's eyes hardened, yet his voice did not rise. "Because in the storm we are all the same," he said. "The desert does not care who you are. It devours all who stand alone." The aliens bowed their heads, yet their hearts struggled. Pride clashed with truth, for they had ruled many worlds with their shining shields and tall domes. Never had they been forced about a stone and sand, yet now they could not escape it. The storm had judged them and found them wanting. As the suns rose higher, heat rolled across the dunes, shadows shrinking under the burning light. The humans began to rebuild their shelter, patching cracks, clearing sand, checking beams. Each hand moved with steady rhythm, as if they had done this 1,000 times. The aliens watched confused, for they thought the danger had passed, yet the humans worked as if another storm might rise at any moment. One young human looked at the sky, his voice, "Quiet storms always return." He said, "Never trust the silence of the desert." His words sent a shiver through the aliens who had thought the storm a rare disaster. Now they realized it was life itself on this world, constant, ruthless, endless. The aliens gathered in a circle, their voices low, their words sharp. Some wanted to leave this cursed land, return to their shining cities on distant stars. Others argued to stay, for they could not let themselves be defeated by a world of sand and storms. Pride still burned in them, but fear now walked beside it. They turned to the humans, searching for guidance, though they did not wish to admit it. The leader of the humans stood near the shelter, his eyes on the horizon, where heat waves shimmered and the sky blurred. He spoke without looking at them. "You came to laugh at us. Now you see the truth. If you wish to stay, you must learn. As we learned, you must build not for pride, but for survival. And if you cannot, then you will not last." The words cut deep, yet carried no malice. They were simple as stone, heavy as the dunes themselves. The aliens had no answer. Their silence was thick with shame. That night, as the twin suns sank behind jagged cliffs, the sky burned red and gold. Shadows stretched across the dunes, and the desert seemed almost calm. The humans gathered inside their shelter, sharing food and water, their voices low, steady, their spirits unbroken. The aliens sat apart, their glowing eyes fixed on the flickering lantern, shame heavy on them, yet also something new, respect. In the deep of night, the wind began to rise again, not a storm, not yet, but a whisper of one. The humans stirred at once, checking walls, tightening beams, pressing sand into weak points, every motion fast, precise, born of long practice. The aliens watched amazed, for even the smallest shift of air made the humans prepare. The aliens realized they had lived in comfort too long, trusting their domes and fields, while humans trusted only their own strength and skill. As dawn broke, the alien commander who had mocked the humans most stood before the leader, his voice heavy. "We cannot build as you do. Our hands are not shaped for stone. Our hearts are not shaped for patience. Yet if we are to survive, we must learn. Will you teach us?" The leader studied him long, his scarred hands resting on rough stone, his eyes sharp. Then he nodded slow, but his words were cold. "The desert is a cruel teacher. If you truly wish to learn, it will strip away your pride. It will break your bones and test your spirit. If you are ready, then stand with us. If not, then return to your shining cities and leave this land to those who endure." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. Some already dreamed of fleeing. Others clenched their fists, desperate not to surrender to weakness. Yet they all knew the truth. The storm had already chosen. The humans had passed the test. While they had failed now, they had to decide if they would kneel and learn or turn and flee. The wind carried a long sigh across the dunes, like the desert itself waited for their choice. As the suns rose high once more, the aliens stood silent before the human shelter, their pride broken, their future uncertain, and the desert stretched endless before them, its voice whispering promises of storms yet to come. And far on the horizon, clouds began to gather again, dark, heavy, rolling like beasts ready to strike the land once more. The humans saw at first, their leader's eyes narrowing, his voice low. "Another storm is coming, and this one will be worse." The aliens turned their eyes wide with fear. The storm had not ended, it had only begun. The horizon darkened fast, as if the desert itself wished to swallow light. The dunes shifted restless under the weight of unseen winds. The humans worked with urgency, stacking stone, reinforcing beams, dragging heavy slabs across the sand, every movement sharp with purpose. while the aliens stood watching, their hearts gripped by a fear they did not wish to name for the storm that came carried a roar unlike the first. The human leader raised his voice clear above the rising howl. His words cut through the growing storm. You will not survive. If you wait, you must move, you must help. The shelter will not stand for us alone. The aliens hesitated. Pride still chained them, yet the sky cracked with thunderous sound so violent it shook the ground beneath their feet, and in that sound pride shattered like brittle glass. Together, humans and aliens carried stones together. They pushed walls higher together. They pressed sand into gaps and braced wooden beams. The aliens found their hands clumsy, their movements slow, yet the humans guided them, teaching them with sharp words and firm gestures. Sweat ran down their faces, grit stuck to their skin, the air thick with dust, the storm approaching with a fury no dome could ever hold. The first winds struck like hammers, sand cutting across armor and skin, the air filled with burning grains that stung eyes and tore at lungs. The aliens cried out, but the humans kept working, their voices calm, steady, never rising above the storm, yet never breaking their rhythm. The shelter grew stronger, each passing breath, walls rising higher, ceiling pressed down with heavy slabs, beams bound tight with rope and stone. Inside the half-finished shelter, children huddled close, their wide eyes staring at cracks where light slipped through. Mothers whispered songs, though their voices trembled. Fathers stood guard at the walls, pressing their weight against stone, every hand a part of survival, every soul bound together. The aliens saw this unity, and shame bit deep, for they had never known such strength of spirit, only strength of weapons and machines. The storm broke full, its roar filled the desert like the scream of endless beasts. Winds twisted into furious spirals, dunes collapsed and rose again like waves of an angry sea. The sky vanished under a wall of brown and gold, lightning cracked through dust, thunder shaking the world. Yet inside the human shelter, the walls held, though they groaned, though sand pressed hard, though beams bent under weight, the shelter stood. Aliens pressed themselves inside, their eyes wide, their chest heaving. The storm raged outside, but inside there was no panic, only focus. The humans moved quick, sealing gaps, reinforcing weak points, adjusting supports, every action done as if rehearsed countless times. The aliens could not believe what they saw. These fragile creatures had mastered the desert's fury while they with all their power had failed. One alien turned to the human leader, his voice broken. Why do you fight this storm? As if it is a war. The leader's eyes burned like steel, his answer clear. Because it is war, he said. The desert is not a place to live. It is a battlefield. Every day it tries to break us. And every day we stand. If we do not fight, we die. The alien fell silent, the truth cutting deeper than the storm itself. Hours stretched endless. The storm beat the shelter like a drum. Walls trembled, sand howled through cracks. Voices of the young rose in fear, but steady hands calmed them. The leader never closed his eyes. He stood at the center, pressing his hand against the main beam, feeling every strain, every groan, as if the shelter itself spoke to him. The alien saw this and knew this man was no builder, no soldier alone. He was both and more, forged by endless struggle. At last, when dawn should have come, there was no light, only silence. The storm broke, not with thunder, but with sudden quiet. The winds fell, the sand settled, the air heavy with dust. The humans opened the door slow, stepping into a world reshaped, dunes carved into new forms, valleys buried, cliffs revealed, the land itself reborn by the storm's rage. The aliens stumbled out behind them, their armor scratched, their faces cut, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they had lived. They looked to their domes, crushed further by the second storm, nothing but wreckage buried under mountains of sand. Yet the human shelter stood, scarred, cracked, but alive, just as the humans themselves. One alien commander knelt in the sand, his voice low, broken. We thought ourselves greater than you, yet without you we would be dead. We mocked you, and the desert laughed at us. The leader of the humans only looked at him, his scarred hand closing around a piece of stone. He spoke quiet. The desert does not laugh, it only teaches, and its lessons are cruel. Remember this. The aliens bowed their heads, yet deep within their hearts something shifted. Respect grew where mockery once lived, fear mixed with admiration, humility replacing pride. They knew now that to survive here they could not stand apart. They must walk with the humans or vanish into the sand like all who thought themselves stronger than the storm. Night came once more, stars shining sharp through a clear sky, the desert calm. At last the humans repaired what was broken. Their hands never idle, their spirits never weary. The aliens helped this time, clumsy, still, yet willing. They lifted stones, carried beams, pressed sand. We're told, sweat running into their eyes, pride set aside for the first time. Inside the shelter, light flickered from fire, shadows danced across stone walls. Children slept safe, families whispered of survival. The aliens sat near, silent, listening to the rhythm of human life. And in that rhythm, they found something strange, a strength, not of weapons, not of force fields, but of unity, of unbreakable spirit forged in struggle. On the horizon, though unseen by weary eyes, the desert gathered once more, for storms never end in this land. They wait, they grow, they return. The humans knew this, and their leader whispered as he looked to the stars, the storm is not our enemy. It is our teacher, and tomorrow it will teach again. The aliens heard him, and though they did not yet understand fully, they felt the truth of his words, for the desert had shown them its power, and the humans had shown them what it meant to endure. The wind rose faint again across the dunes, a promise of trials yet to come. And in the shelter, humans and aliens waited together, no longer strangers, but survivors bound by the storm that sought to break them, yet could not. The desert night stretched endless, the sky burned with stars like frozen fires above. The sand and silence spread heavy, only broken by the creak, with the soft shifting of stone and the quiet breathing of survivors within the shelter. The humans worked even after the storm, their hands never idle, as if they knew the desert gave no mercy to those who rested too long. The aliens sat apart, their eyes fixed on the humans, watching every movement with a strange new respect that tasted almost bitter in their mouth, for pride was not easy to swallow. The human leader stood near the doorway, his gaze locked on the horizon where faint winds stirred again. His scarred hand pressed against the rough stone of the wall, his voice carried low, but strong. Storms never end here, he whispered to no one, and everyone. They wait behind the dunes, they grow in silence. And when they return stronger. The aliens shifted uneasily, some glanced at the sky, as if hoping it would deny his words, but the desert was not a liar, it had already shown its truth. Through the night, the humans rebuilt what had been weakened, each stone reset, each rope pulled tight, beams reinforced, walls pressed with new layers of sand. The aliens joined, this time clumsy, but willing, guided by sharp commands, by firm gestures. The humans did not mock their struggle, they simply showed them again and again, until they learned. Sweat burned in alien eyes, grit stung their skin, yet they did not stop, for to stop was to die. As the first light of dawn spilled across the dunes, a deep growl rose in the distance, a sound too low for ears of arrogance, yet clear to ears of survival. The human leader lifted his hand, and silence fell. He whispered only two words, it returns, and in that instant every heart, human and alien, felt the weight of coming fury. The horizon darkened far away, a wall of shifting gold and brown rising higher than before, a beast reborn from the desert's endless hunger. The aliens trembled, fear running deep, for their domes were gone, their weapons useless against wind and sand. Their only hope, the shelter they had once mocked, now their only shield. They turned to the human leader, desperate voices rising. What must we do? Tell us how to stand against this. He looked at them, his eyes hard as stone. You will do what we do, you will stand, you will fight, you will endure. The storm rose fast, its breath already reaching them, sand stinging the air, grit swirling around faces. The humans shouted orders, voices sharp over the howl. Move the stones, brace the beams, cover the cracks. Every hand moved, every body strained. The aliens obeyed, no longer questioning, no longer laughing. They carried stone, they tied rope, they pressed sand with their own hands. Sweat poured, blood dripped from scraped skin, but they did not stop. Then the storm hit, not as the first, not as the second, but greater than both combined. The desert roared with rage, walls of wind slamming against the shelter like waves of an angry ocean. Sand pierced the air like blades, tearing at flesh, tearing at armor. Lightning cracked within the clouds, thunder rolled like mountains collapsing, yet the shelter stood, trembling, groaning, yet refusing to fall, for hands pressed it from within, hearts poured strength into its walls. Inside, voices rose in prayer and song, in cries of fear, yet also in shouts of courage. The human leader moved through the shelter, his hand steady, his voice unbroken. He pressed beams back into place. He sealed gaps with stone. He raised those who fell. He carried those too weak to stand. He was everywhere at once, his presence of fire that would not die. The aliens saw him, and something new grew in their hearts, not fear, not shame, but loyalty. The storm raged on hours that felt like years. The shelter bent under pressure, beams snapped, but were replaced, walls cracked, but were filled again, hands bled, but did not stop, bodies shook, but did not fall. The desert screamed for their end. Yet they screamed louder with life and will and defiance until the storm broke, as all storms must, breaking not in triumph, but in silence, heavy still silence that pressed on every ear. When the door was pushed open at last, the world outside was gone, reshaped again, dunes higher, cliffs carved, deeper valleys filled with new rivers of sand. The aliens stepped out weak, shaking yet alive. They looked to the ruins of their kind, their domes gone, their machines buried, their power erased by the desert. And then they looked to the human shelter, scarred, battered, cracked, yet still standing like a scarred warrior who refused to kneel. The human leader stood in the doorway, his voice quiet, yet sharp as blades. You see now, the desert cannot be defeated, only endured, only respected, only faced together. The aliens bowed. Their heads some fell to their knees, not from weakness, but from humility. They whispered words of gratitude, words of apology, words of promises that they would never again mock what they did not understand. That night, as firelight danced within the shelter, humans and aliens sat side by side, sharing food, sharing silence, sharing survival. The aliens whispered among themselves of what they had seen, the strength of those they had thought fragile, the wisdom of those they had mocked, the unity that held stronger than steel. One alien commander raised his voice to the leader and asked, "What gives your people such strength?" The human lifted his gaze to the flames, his voice slow, heavy, each word a stone. "We do not survive because we are stronger. We survive because we cannot afford to fail. Each child depends on us. Each family depends on us. Each storm is war. And if we fall even once, we are gone forever. That is why we endure." The aliens listened, their hearts stirred as if touched by something they had never known before, something greater than technology, greater than power, something living within the spirit itself. And they knew then that this was why the desert did not break the humans, and why it might one day break them if they forgot this lesson. As night deepened, silence grew outside the dunes, shifted faint winds whispering again, carrying a promise that storms never end. The humans knew this. Their leader whispered to the fire, "It will return, it always does, and we will be ready." And now, perhaps, so will they. The aliens looked to him, and though fear lingered, they felt something stronger, rising hope. The desert slept in uneasy silence, though the humans knew it was not sleep, but waiting. The winds had eased, the stars burned bright, and the shelter stood breathing like a living thing, its walls scarred but unbroken. The aliens lay restless, unable to close their eyes, for each time they heard again the roar of the storm and felt the sand clawing at their skin. Yet the humans rested calmly, their bodies worn, but their minds steady, as if they had walked this path 1,000 times before. The human leader stood once more at the doorway, his shadow stretched across the sand, his gaze locked on the horizon, where faint ripples moved under the moonlight. He whispered softly, not to others, but to himself, "It is never over. The desert always tests. The desert always watches." His hand brushed the wall of the shelter, and he could feel its heartbeat, the heartbeat of every stone, every beam, every hand that had held it together. The aliens gathered around him, unsure if they should speak, yet one finally asked with voice trembling, "How can you face it again? How can you stand without fear when the storm returns stronger?" Each time the human leader turned his head, his eyes sharp and steady. "Fear is not our enemy," he said. "Fear is the fire that teaches us where to stand, and when a whole we do not banish fear, we walk with it, and it makes us unbreakable." The words struck deep. The aliens had thought strength was the absence of fear, yet here was a man scarred and weary speaking of fear as an ally, not a curse, and it unsettled them, yet also gave them something they had never held before, a spark of courage. As the dawn broke, the desert stirred again. A low rumble trembled across the dunes, not the scream of wind this time, but something deeper, something alive. The humans rose to their feet, weapons in hand, crude but sharp. The aliens froze, confusion in their eyes. The human leader raised his hand, silence. He commanded, and they obeyed. Then the ground itself shifted, sand spilling like liquid, as something vast moved beneath its shadows, twisting under the surface. From the dunes a shape emerged tall and terrible, a beast of the desert, forged from sand and scale, with eyes burning like fire, its body rippling with power. It was no storm, no wind, no natural wrath, but a living terror born from the desert itself. The aliens cried out, stepping back, their courage faltering, yet the humans stepped forward, blades in hand, spears raised, bows strung with arrows tipped in fire. The leader spoke loud and fierce. "This is why we build shelters. This is why we train. This is why we endure storms. Are not the only enemies here. The desert birth creatures that feed on fear, creatures that come when weakness shows. Hold your ground, stand with us, or fall alone." The beast roared a sound that shook the very air, sand blasting outward like waves. The aliens stumbled, yet the humans did not break their line. They moved as one, every man, every woman, every child who could lift a stone or spear their feet, rooted their eyes. Fierce the leader raised his weapon and cried, "Strike together," and their voices rose with him, a thunder of defiance. The battle raged, the beast lunged, claws tearing sand into rivers. Humans leapt aside, spears struck, scales, arrows burned against its hide, stones crashed upon its skull. The aliens at first froze, yet when they saw the humans stand, when they saw blood spill, and still the fight continue, something in them broke free. They lifted stones, they seized broken beams, they threw fire, they shouted with rage, no longer mocking, no longer doubting, but fighting as if survival was their own. The beast screamed, its body twisting, thrashing against the storm of blades and fire. Its tail slammed against the shelter walls, cracking stone dust filling the air. Yet still the walls held. Humans swarmed upon the creature, climbing, striking, cutting, their voices fierce with battle cries. It thrashed, it roared, yet every wound grew deeper, every strike heavier, until at last it faltered, falling to the sand, trembling with its last breath before silence fell heavy. Across the desert, the humans stood, bloodied, torn, yet alive, their leader lowering his weapon slowly, his voice quiet but clear. "It is done. The desert has tested us again, and we still stand." The aliens fell to their knees, not from fear this time, but from awe. They looked upon the humans, not as fragile, not as weak, not as strangers, but as warriors who carried storms and monsters within their scars. That night the fire burned brighter than ever before. Humans and aliens together sat within the shelter, their voices soft, but filled with new respect. One alien commander raised his cup of water and spoke, his voice steady. "You have shown us what we did not believe, that strength is not built in walls of light or shields of energy, but in hands that do not stop, in hearts that do not fall." He turned to the human leader and asked, "What is the secret of your endurance?" The leader looked into the fire, his face lined with age and battle, his voice calm. "The desert does not care for pride, it does not care for power, it does not care for what we build. It only asks if we will stand again and again and again until we no longer can, and that is what makes us strong. We do not win against it, we endure until it passes." The aliens listened, their hearts stirred by a truth simple yet heavier than any shield they had known. They felt shame for their laughter, but more than that, they felt hunger for this strength, this way of survival that no storm could erase. Outside, the night was quiet, too quiet for the desert, always waited, always planning its next test. The winds whispered faint promises of return, yet within the shelter there was no fear, only readiness. The humans sharpened their blades, the aliens repaired the walls together, sweat dripping, firelight dancing, and a bond forming stronger than stone. The leader closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of silence, then whispered, barely audible, but every ear caught it, "It will come again. Storms, monsters, hunger, death. It always comes, and when it does, we will stand." And for the first time, the aliens believed. The desert world turned silent again after the fall of the beast, but silence in this place was never peace. It was only the pause before the next strike. The humans knew this truth, and the aliens had begun to learn it together. They worked through the night, hands cut and backs bent, carrying stone, and would repairing the cracks in the shelter, each movement slow, yet determined, every voice quiet, but firm and steady. The human leader stood near the doorway, his gaze locked on the horizon where the sands shimmered under the twin moons. His scars seemed to glow in the pale light, and the weight of many years pressed on his shoulders. He whispered, not to anyone, but to the desert itself, "You are not finished with us, yet I know your ways, and I will not bend." His voice was hard, but there was also sorrow, for he knew more storms would come, and more beasts would rise, and more lives would be taken before the desert accepted their place. The aliens gathered around him, unsure if they should speak, but one stepped forward, his voice low, yet strong. You stood. When we could not, you fought. When we froze, we mocked your walls. But your walls saved us, and your hands saved us. Teach us to endure as you do. The human leader turned his head, his eyes sharp and cold, yet also kind. You cannot be taught with words. He said, you must live through the storm. You must bleed in the sand, and only then will you understand. But you have taken the first step. Tonight you stood with us, and that is enough. As dawn broke, the winds began to stir. Once more the sky above twisted with colors deep red and burning gold, a sight of beauty, yet also a warning. The desert was not done. It would never be done. The humans tightened their belts, checked their weapons, and stood ready. The aliens, though weary, copied their movements, their fear not gone, but now joined with a new force resolve. The horizon darkened, clouds rising faster than before. The wind screamed in the distance. The desert howled its fury, carrying with it a wall of sand taller than mountains and stronger than steel. The aliens gasped. Many fell to their knees, terror shaking their bones. But the humans did not move. They lifted their weapons and pressed their hands against the shelter walls, as if giving strength to the stone itself. The storm came like a giant roaring beast, swallowing the sun, drowning the light. The winds ripped across the desert, tearing dunes apart, slamming against the shelter in waves of fury. The ground shook, the air burned, and the night swallowed the day. The aliens cried out, voices broken, but the humans shouted back, their cries fierce, their bodies braced. As the shelter shook, yet did not break, the humans pushed stones back into place, tied beams with ropes, held doors shut with their bodies, their strength unending. In the heart of the storm, the human leader raised his voice above the roar. You think this storm is greater than us. You think it can take what we built, but it will not. We are human. We endure. We break. We bleed. We rise again. No storm can erase us, and no desert can claim us. His words carried through the walls, echoing in the hearts of the aliens, who now pressed their shoulders against the walls beside him. Their fear turned into fire. Their weakness burned into strength. The storm raged for hours, each wave stronger, each scream louder. But the shelter held, though cracked, though bent, though trembling, it stood. And when the storm finally began to fade, when the winds weakened and the sands fell silent, the shelter still stood. And within it, humans and aliens together still breathed, still lived, still unbroken. When the sky cleared, the desert lay in ruin, dunes flattened, stones scattered, yet the shelter rose like a scar upon the earth, its walls scarred, its roof bent. But it had endured, and so had those inside. The aliens stepped out, their eyes wide, their hearts trembling, for they had seen what no words could explain. They had seen the desert unleash its fury, and they had stood within a shelter built not of light, not of force fields, not of pride, but of hands and stone and unyielding will. The alien commander turned to the human leader, his voice quiet, yet filled with awe. We mocked you, we doubted you, we believed ourselves greater. Yet it is we who would have fallen without you. It is we who would have been erased. Your shelter is not weak. It is not primitive. It is power in a form we never understood. The human leader looked at him, his face worn, his voice calm. It is not the shelter that is strong. It is the hands that builded it. It's the hearts that refuse to bow. This is the truth of humanity. The aliens bowed their heads not in shame, but in respect. They had come as observers, laughing at the fragility of men, yet they would leave as witnesses to a strength that no storm, no beast, no desert could break. They had seen the heart of humanity, and it had burned brighter than the suns. As the night returned, the humans lit their fire within the shelter, and the aliens sat with them, no longer as strangers, no longer as doubters, but as companions who had faced the desert together. They shared food, they shared water, they shared silence. And in that silence was a bond that no storm could undo. The human leader sat near the flames, his eyes half closed, yet still watchful, his voice low. The desert will test us again. It always does. But now you know the truth. The storm is never the end. It is only the beginning. And when it comes again, we will stand together. The fire crackled, the wind whispered across the dunes. And though the desert slept, it was not in peace, for it was only waiting. Yet within the shelter, there was no fear, only strength, only unity, only the quiet certainty that whatever came, they would endure. And so the story of the shelter became more than survival. It became a lesson carved into the hearts of all who lived through it, a story of laughter turned to respect, of weakness turned to strength, and of humanity, proving once more that even against storms and beasts and deserts, they would always rise again.